its Torments. A sermon on hell delivered at Louvain University, Belgium, in approximately 1574, and being one of 5 sermons given by the saint on the 4 last things: death, judgment, heaven, and hell, by Saint Robert Bellarmine, Bishop, Confessor, and Doctor of the Universal Church. Hell and its Torments. My dear people, when I consider the beginnings and progress of the Christian religion, and recall to memory the signs and prodigies of our Liberator, there are 2 things which seem to me most wondrous and well-nigh incredible. The first is that some people are found who refuse to embrace our most holy faith. The second is that they who have taken up that faith dare to commit sin. Our faith has been foretold by so many predictions for the prophets. It has been taken up by so great a consensus of peoples. It has been based upon so many great a number of miracles, and nourished by so much hope. It has been increased by charity, strengthened by antiquity, confirmed by the succession of bishops, and, ultimately, fortified by the very authority of the Roman Catholic Church. Yet who would not be amazed that since the preaching of our faith, some people are yet to be found, to whom the Catholic doctrine of Christ has been less approved, and who have not feared to subscribe their names to the authors of new sects and to the master of errors. In like manner, a person may hear that the belief has prevailed among some people that eternal punishments have been decreed on those who violate the law of God. Yet, would not he be astonished that the very people who have believed this nevertheless sin against God with the utmost ease and audacity? Now, if it were a matter of caution that, by the edict of a king, at a certain hour, no one should set foot outside of the city gates, under the penalty of death by hanging, who would be found to be so negligent and heedless of his own safety that, at the forbidden hour, and in the presence of many witnesses, he would venture to set his foot outside the gate? And if perchance for some reason he were to do this, would he not afterwards be afraid, not only of the witnesses, but also almost of the very gate itself, as if it were somehow conscious that a crime had been committed? Now all Christians have been persuaded that the Almighty and most excellent God has decreed by an irrevocable sentence that they who depart this life guilty of having grievously violated God's law is bound over as a convict to eternal chains, and is tortured without end by unspeakable torments, if he does not sincerely repent of his sins before death. Nevertheless, we see daily that many people, under no conclusion, unasked, and often uninvited, offend God with their own initiative, free will, and pleasure of mind. Indeed, they even seek occasions of sin, rejoicing when they find them, and grieving when they do not. What shall we say is the cause of this? My dear people, there seem to me to be 3 principal causes of this: lack of consideration, ignorance, and self-love. The last of these, which the Greeks most suitably and significantly call philautia. Now, lack of consideration is not the least cause. On the contrary, it is perhaps the primary reason why the peril of everlasting torture which is hanging over us all does not call us back from sinning. For a great many people do not lack faith, but they greatly lack an attentive and diligent consideration of those things which faith proposes and teaches. For this reason I have considered that I shall be doing a work most pleasing to God and useful to yourselves if today, as I promised in my last sermon, I call to your memories and place before your very eyes how horrible, how atrocious, and how abiding are the tortures which God has prepared for the wicked and impious people. But before I begin to speak about the torments of hell, refutations must be made, based upon the other two factors which I mentioned a moment ago. To begin with, because we are ignorant of the gravity and magnitude of sin, we can scarcely be led to believe that the tortures of hell are such as Holy Scripture threatens upon nefarious men. St. Augustine affirms this in these words: "Now eternal punishment seems hard and unjust to human senses, for the reason that in this our infirmity of dying senses there is lacking that sense of the highest and pure wisdom, that whereby it can be felt what a great outrage was committed in that first provocation. If we truly understand the gravity of the fault, we would scarcely entertain any doubt as to the bitterness of the penalty. Would you like me to say a word about how great is the gravity of sin? My dear people, it is so immense that our minds can in no way grasp it, for it overcomes the faculties of the human mind and conquers all the intelligence of mortal beings. For if it be fitting to measure the magnitude of an offense by the dignity and nobility of him who is offended, then certainly sin, which wounds infinite dignity and nobility, will be an immense and an infinite evil. How perilous and how grave is the disease of sin, you shall know from the excellence and dignity of the doctor himself, and of the medicines which are necessary to cure it. When we hear of someone who is so ill that he is not content with the doctors of his own locality, but summons the most learned physicians from every place and from the most distant places, and has need of the most exquisite medicines prepared at the greatest expense, then we who are not doctors would say that this person is laboring under some most grave kind of ailment. What then ought we to think of the disease of sin, which the wisdom, the genius, the power, and the faculties of all men and all angels could never have healed? And clearly, that disease would have led the whole human race to destruction had not wisdom descended from the very bosom of God the Father and prepared a most exquisite medicine from the very blood of his own most dignified body. Truly, my dear people, if we had no other argument than this to demonstrate the gravity of sin, this argument is such as plainly to persuade all men that any fault whatsoever committed against God is a crime so gigantic that, regarding the penalty due the fault, we may with utmost justice say, Eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of man, the tortures and torments which God has prepared for those who offend him. For why would God, who is wisdom itself, have wished to become man, to be led to the cross, and to die in order to destroy the reign of sin, if it were not to triumph over the power and dominion of Satan, and to become himself the extermination of sin? If therefore we think at times on these things, we would not be so easily inclined toward sinning, and we would have quite a different opinion of the tortures of hell. But now let us return to the remaining cause of our torpor. My dear people, It is wondrous that a persuasive force lies in love, damnable self-love. For it is, as it were, persuasion itself. It is mighty by nature, and such a smooth-tongued matchmaker that, through its suggestion, nearly all people easily believe that they will either pay no penalties at all, or brief and meagre ones, even though they have lived unrighteously and wickedly. Now this was the origin of that famous opinion of certain philosophers who, as Aristotle relates, attributed excellent deeds to themselves and desired to be believed and regarded by others as being the authors of these deeds, while on the other hand they assigned to a certain external cause all fault of crimes and outrages which they sometimes committed. Thus, if they acted well, they wished to be rewarded, and, if badly, they wished to pay no penalty. From the same root, in turn, arose those errors of even Christian writers which St. Augustine recounts and refutes in Book 12 of the City of God. For some people had believed that no penalties awaited Catholics, even those who led corrupt lives. Still others had, by their very own verdict, dispensed from eternal punishment not only Catholics, but heretics as well, since the latter had once been Catholics. Yet others had asserted that no one, whether Catholic or heretic, who had been initiated by the sacrament of baptism can be brought to everlasting torture. Others, going further yet, had thought all men, whether Christian, Jew, or pagan, are to be saved at the last judgment, either through their own merits or the advocacy and suffrages of others. There had even been people who promised the hope of pardon and the obtaining of eternal salvation, not only to men, but to devils in hell. What else but accursed self-love gave all these people such a misdirected sense of compassion, and caused them to take up a paltry view of the tortures of hell? These things being so, it ought not to amaze us if this same self-love has nowadays brought it about in some people that only sluggish and with difficulty can they comprehend the peril of eternal and unendurable tortures is hanging over them. Indeed, these people foolishly reason with themselves and say, "Surely God would never have redeemed me at so great a price and endured so many things here on earth for my sake, if on account of a single blasphemy or some other crime, he had it in mind to bind me over to an everlasting dungeon." Truly, my people, we must encounter this false and pernicious opinion, and show upon what a weak foundation it rests. Let us say that our king comes to love some obscure common man, adorns him with the public offices, and finally places him in command of the beautiful and fully equipped citadel of his own empire. Now let us say that this person comprises with the enemies against his own king, and allows the citadel committed to his care to come into their hands. If it should happen, by some issue of events, that this man were captured and brought into his king's presence, what do you suppose the king would do with him? Would the fact that the king once dearly loved that traitor deter him from pronouncing upon him the penalties due to traitors? Indeed, the penalties would be atrocious, and so much the more so as the benefices previously conferred upon him had been greater. So it is with us. Even though God has loved us with a mighty love, and has sent his Son to us, and willed that he suffer and endure so many things for our liberation, yet despise this, he will still punish us with eternal tortures, if we desert to the camp of the enemy and betray the citadels of our souls to demons. Is there anyone who has not read or heard the history of the patriarch Joseph? He was sold by his brothers into bondage, and when he was led into Egypt, he was bought by the chief of Pharaoh's host, who came to love him dearly, made him steward over his whole household, and committed to him the administration of all his affairs. Yet when he began to suspect that Joseph had seduced his wife into debauchery, he was mightily roused, and not only deposed him from the prefecture of the household, but had him cast into a most foul dungeon. What shall we say about the damned angels? Was not the prince of devils once the prince of angels? Indeed. For as it is taught by St. Gregory the Great and Tertullian, long before him, and by many other writers of the Church, he was the first and most noble of all the angels, and as much the most preeminent of all God's works, as he is now the most humiliated, wretched, and debased. Hence in sacred Scripture he is called Lucifer, the beginning of the ways of God, the seal of resemblance, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. The prophet Ezekiel also says of him, "Every precious stone was thy covering." And again, no tree in the paradise of God was like him in his own beauty. And likewise, all the trees of pleasure that were in paradise of God envied him. If therefore the greatest, wisest, and most eminent of all the angels was thrust out of heaven for a single sin and hurled into the abyss, how comes it that we, who cling to the slime of innumerable sins, flatter ourselves concerning the benevolence and kindness of God? What does it matter to object that God afflicted not only angels, but even his very own Son, because of sins? My dear people, there is nothing that God loves more mightily than his own true and natural Son. Yet, when the Son of God took our sins upon his shoulders and professed himself willing to offer satisfaction for them, God smote him, and, as the prophet Isaiah says, bruised him in infirmity. He wished him to bear sorrows and tortures, which no human being has ever endured here on earth. Great, therefore, and implacable is the hatred of God against sin, when in his own Son he so severely avenges the crimes of others. But, if in the green wood they do these things, what shall be done in the dry? Our Lord himself was adorned with the first fruits of all and radiated with every grace and spiritual comeliness. If God so fiercely blasted him with the flame of the passion, kindled by the crimes of others, so as to make him the most abject of men, a man of sorrows, what shall be done in the dry wood, that is, in human beings devoid of the dew of grace and virtue? What shall be wrought on them by the furnace of hell, which shall be ignited by so many crimes, outrages, and misdeeds? Since these things are so, my dear people, we ought in no way to doubt that the punishments of hell are unbearable and unspeakable. Yet it seems to me that I hear someone raising his voice in objection and saying, "Has anyone ever come back from hell to affirm that these things are true? O foolish question! That dungeon is mightily to be feared for the very reason that no one has ever been able to return from it. For if some people were to come back from hell, all could hope that they will some day do likewise." Since then, no one ever has returned. It is a form of proof that hell is so deep a pit that no one can rise out of it. There is a moral and sound judgment here, and let us learn it from the very fables, if from no other source. The fable indeed relates that a fox saw many creatures going into a lion's den, and none of them coming out again. The fox did not say, "No one comes forth to announce that some peril lies in the lion's den. Therefore there will be no peril there." The fable, I say, does not relate that he said this, but that, on the contrary, the fox was more mightily afraid to approach the lion's den, for the very reason that he saw many going in and none coming out. Have we need of further corroboration? Many people have, by divine power, been restored to life, and have not only by word and deed recounted the magnitude of the penalties of hell, but have affirmed that they surpass anything we can imagine. Saint Gregory the Great, Saint John Climacus, and several other saints and learned men have documented these cases. Let me return now to the matter which is the crux of our sermon. In any sin 2 perversions are found, one being a turning away from the highest and uncreated good, and the other a turning towards a, by comparison, meager and created good. Similarly, in the penalty corresponding to that fault, 2 sorrows are to be found, the first of which arises from the loss of eternal beatitude, the second from the tortures and torments which shall be brought down upon body and soul alike. Now these 2 tortures the theologians call the loss of penalty and the penalty of sense. Let us first speak of the loss of happiness. Which is the heavier penalty, my dear people? No penalty can be conceived or even imagined which is so monstrous that it is not surpassed by the penalty of losing the highest good. Now the heat of fire applied to the body causes such torture that it cannot be borne, but it only takes away the good constitution and temperament of the body, which is an altogether moderate and slender good. How fierce, then, will be the torture of that severing and tearing away from God, the mere sight of whom is so great a good that it instantly makes a person blessed and happy. Among the Romans a mighty punishment, and that considered by far the mightiest of all, was exile. That is, when citizens, because of some great crime, were compelled to depart from the city and be deprived of the sight of their fellow citizens, and to live among barbarians on certain islands that were half wilderness. This is why Cicero, when he recalled from exile, re-entered, as it were, a new world. He was stupefied and, in like a manner of speaking, confounded heaven with earth. Behold the beauty of Italy, he said. Behold the fame of its towns, the loveliness of its territories. Behold its fields, its fruits, the beauty of Rome. Behold the humanity of its citizens, the dignity of the republic. Behold its majesty. What great sorrow, then, will they perceive who are barred from the palaces of heaven, from the commonwealth of the saints, from those happy regions where peace, love, joy, and tranquillity reign, where the voice of praise and exaltation resounds, and the everlasting Alleluia is sung, and ultimately from the purest light, which makes those who look upon it happy and blessed. What sorrow will they perceive when, instead, they are compelled to inhabit forever the most stinking of dungeons, a bilge trough fouled with every kind of filth, where there is no order, but everlasting horror dwelleth, where no voice shall be heard but the voice of wailers and blasphemers, no sound but the sound of striking hammers and whips, and in the company of the whole monstrous and barbarous host of devils, and with all the scum of sinful mankind. But I perceive that some lovers of this present life will say, do we not in this present life lack all of those things which you have mentioned? Who of us abides in the palaces of heaven? Who of us enjoys most pure light? But we, on that account, are saddened. Are we tormented? On the contrary. If it were permitted always to be in this body, and to enjoy the goods of this present life, would we think ever about the goods of heaven? My dear people, this is a common deception of ignorant men, who do not realize that after death we shall have different eyes and a different opinion and reckoning of things than we have here now. St. John Chrysostom expressed this beautifully in the following words: he who burns in hell loses utterly the kingdom of God. This indeed is a greater penalty than the torment of flames. Now I know that a great many people fear hell, yet I say that the loss of that great glory is a punishment more bitter than that of hell itself. It is not at all amazing if I cannot depict that punishment in a sermon. For, since we do not know the blessedness of those heavenly prizes, we naturally can have no knowledge of what is involved in their loss. Nevertheless, we shall without doubt learn the magnitude of this loss when we shall have begun to be instructed by experience. It is then that our eyes shall be opened, and the veil drawn back. It is then that impious men shall know, to their mighty sorrow, what a difference there is between the eternal and the highest good, and these fragile and perishable things of mortality. In order that we may illustrate this matter as best we can, accept, if you please, the following comparison. There was once a certain most mighty king who had no son to succeed him in the administration of his kingdom. One day he took notice of a boy who was of elegant and pleasing appearance, but of humble origin and slender means. He gave orders for the boy to be brought to him, and then had his education entrusted to instructors. The king stipulated in his will that if upon reaching maturity the boy showed himself to be learned, wise, grave, and adorned with every manner of virtue, and likewise found to be suitable to man the helm of the state, he was to be proclaimed legitimate king and ruler, settled upon the royal throne, invested with the diadem and the scepter, and entrusted with the government of the entire kingdom. If, on the contrary, he turned out to be a man of the meanest sort of spirit, he was to be bound in chains and condemned to the galleys, with all their due ignominy and disgrace. The royal ministers immediately obeyed the king's command. The boy was summoned and handed over to the instructors. Diligence was applied to his education in letters and manners, but the boy was enticed by other boys without realizing what was being done to him. The professor no sooner set foot out of the house than the boy would stow his book in the farthest corner of the room, and while away the whole day building little houses out of pottery fragments and playing other boyish games. Among evening the professor would return and demand a recitation of the lessons, but the boy could scarcely remember where he had left his book. The irate professor would thrash the boy and overturn his foot the little pottery houses he had built. He would say to the boy, "Oh, if you only knew what you are forfeiting by these childish pastimes of yours. If you knew how much loss this negligence in your studies is working upon you, you shall know by and by, but only when the understanding of it shall profit you nothing." Now the boy, being all boy, would weep at the professor's whipping and rebuke, but was even more tearful at the overthrow of his pottery houses. He gave not a thought to the words of the professor, nor to the king's will and testament. Indeed, the following day he would forget the thrashing and rebuke he had received. Once again he would build up his houses of pottery, and betake himself to his accustomed childish games. When the boy grew up, the executors of the king's will found him to be rude, unschooled, and altogether unfit to govern the kingdom. They read the king's will to him, and then had him clad in irons and banished to the galleys with the utmost disgrace. Now which do you think he bore with more tears and bitterness, the toil of the galleys or the forfeiture of the kingdom? You may take it from me that he grieved bitterly enough over the fact that he had been condemned to the galleys, for I do not think that an unhappier state can be found here on earth. Indeed, they who have been sentenced to the galleys have nothing to expect but a bountiful serving of the whip. Yet I reckon that without any doubt he took it much more grievously and woefully to heart that he had been stripped of the honor of a most great and sumptuous kingdom. For what more miserable and unhappy thing can be mentioned or thought of than to have suffered the loss of the most splendid and noble kingdom on account of childish trifles? My dear people, to whom of us does this parable not apply? For while we live here on earth, we are children. We know nothing lofty, we contemplate nothing sublime. We are all occupied with ludicrous matters and childish trifles. With what great anxiety do we pile up our houses of pottery? How do they differ from those pottery houses of the child, save that they are slightly greater in size? Of such are the enthusiasms of merchants, the ambitions of office-holders and courtiers, the mole of architects, the contentions of kings and princes over cities, over provinces, over kingdoms. Of such are the lawsuits of private citizens, over possessions, over boundaries, over drainage rights. Ye, they are all trifles. They are trifles only slightly larger in size than those of children, and therefore, as St. Augustine says, are they called business. Yet even though all these things I have mentioned are trifles, when compared to the business of the life to come, yet they keep the vast majority of people so occupied that they cannot give a thought to the business of the heavenly kingdom, which is the one true and serious business of life. All these things that are seen by the heavenly professor, who has taken our instruction under his charge, that we may be found worthy to lay hold upon the kingdom of heaven. He does not cease to grieve over all our little twists and turns, and to cry out, "O children, how will you love childishness, and fools covet those things which are hurtful to themselves. Why do you love vanity and seek after lying? And then, with his foot he overturns our little houses of pottery. He often confounds our designs. A merchant awaits a cargo freighter loaded with goods from the Orient, and behold, he hears that the ship has been wrecked and all his merchandise sunk in the ocean. Some other man places all his hope in his son, and trusts that in short time he will become a doctor of theology, a canonist, even pope. He builds upon him all the lofty towers of his thoughts, and behold, he hears that a slight fever has come upon his son, and that now after a few days the boy has reached the close of his life. Another man is invited to a wedding, to an elegant luncheon, to an illustrious drinking party. He makes ready to go, and behold, an ailment comes upon him, and he is compelled to effect its cure by abstaining from wine and food. Who is it, I ask you? Who does these things to us? Who is it who thus eludes the thoughts and counsels of men? My dear people, it is our professor who does these things, and he does them not because he hates us, but because he dearly loves us. For he wishes to cut away the impediments that hold us back as we run our course towards heaven, and that this keeps us from paying heed to the choice of heaven we have made. Truly, after the manner of foolish children, we bear with a mean spirit the overthrow of our houses of pottery, the loss of earthly resources, and other chastisements of the Lord. Ye we pile up, yet again, our little pottery houses, but to the kingdom of heaven, to which we are called, through these lashings we give no thought. But the time will come, believe me, the time will come, when through the gate of death we shall enter another world, a world where we shall suddenly find that we are full-grown adults, a new region where no child can be found. For all of us, when we pass hence out of this life, are by that very passage changed into grown men. There it shall be announced to us, for you have been prepared for the kingdom of heaven, in those most beautiful domiciles, if only you had heed to true wisdom. But because you preferred to be foolish children and despised the voice and admonitions of the professor, you shall be cast forth with ignominy and disgrace into the outer darkness, where there shall be weeping and gnashing of teeth, and other tortures and eternal punishments. My dear people, what shall we say then? What shall we think then of those little pottery houses, those ludicrous honors, those child businesses, when we shall perceive more clearly than the light of the sun that on account of shadows and dreams we have brought about the loss of things which are inexplicably good, truly lasting and never perishing? Oh, with what grief of spirit shall sinful men say then, what hath pride profited us, or what advantage hath the boasting of riches brought us? What did it profit us to go running over all lands and oceans in order to pile up wealth? What did it profit us to spend such great labor to maintain our state and the palaces of princes? What did it profit us to apply such intense art to the courting of great honors, that is, to the courting of earth and ashes, so that we might attain to honors ourselves? What did it profit us to rack our brains and spend whole nights in study, so that we could comprehend the most obscure authors and capture from them some ray of light? For behold, all things have passed like shadows, and we have been ignorant of true honors, true riches, true pleasures, true wisdom, of the true and highest and eternal good. And we have lost these things past any hope of regaining them. My dear people, this gift of spirit will be so great that, although all of the damned will surely know that every access to eternal beatitude has been closed to them, and that the greatest gulf has been put between themselves and the place of the blessed, yet by the force of natural desire they will not be able to refrain from speaking the words, Lord, Lord, open to us. Our most wise doctor, St. John Chrysostom, therefore says, Hell is indeed an intolerable thing. Who does not know that the punishment of hell is also horrible? Now if a person were to posit the existence of 1,000 hells, he could say nothing that would accurately convey what it is to be thrust away from the honor of that blessed glory of heaven, to be hated by Christ, and to hear those words from him, I never knew thee, and to be charged with having denied food and drink to him, when he hungered and thirsted. It would be better to endure 1,000 bolts of lightning than to see that face of gentleness and piety turned away from us, and those eyes full of all tranquillity, in no way able to bear the sight of us. The loss of the highest good carries with it the loss of all other good things as well. What does this mean? Simply that the eyes of the damned shall never again perceive any beautiful sight, nor their ears any sweet singing, nor their sense of taste any joyful savour, nor their sense of touch any gentle thing. For once a person has been excluded from the consortium of God, he is plunged once and for all into the ocean of all woes and calamities without any hope of escape. Let me conclude at this point what I have to say concerning the loss of the highest good, and proceed now to the torture which theologians have called the penalty of sense. This torture is so named because it is applied to the senses and energies, to those of the body without, as well as of the soul within. Let us speak first of the torture of the interior senses. There are 4 faculties of the soul which pertain to this matter before us, in which we will be tortured by astonishing torments in hell. The first is that faculty to which the Greeks gave the name phantasia, to which we give the name of thought. The second is memory, the third is intelligence, and the fourth is will. The faculty of thought will be tortured by a certain most weighty grasp of the torments in which the body and soul shall then dwell. For if in this life some grievous pain can so subdue thought unto itself that a man, even though he fervently wishes it, cannot keep thinking of that pain, what shall be wrought in souls by the punishments of hell, which are greater beyond compare? Thus thought shall make pains acute, and pain shall excite thought, and they shall mutually so fuel each other that they will leave no place at rest in the souls or bodies of the damned. Such shall be the perpetual contemplations of those who have fruitfully meditated upon these things, but have refused to do so, of those who scorn here on earth to apply the most useful thoughts as a bridle against their lusts. In the life to come, these very thoughts shall be cruel executioners to torment them. Memory also shall be no slight cross to the souls of the damned, when it shall be put before them the old-time happiness and bygone pleasures, for the sake of which they have come down to these torments. For then finally shall they know with what bountiful salt were sprinkled those banquets, which once seemed so sweet to them, and with what sharp pepper they were seasoned. But much more mightily shall they be tortured when they compare the brevity of bygone pleasures to the eternity of their present sorrows. For what mathematician can be found who is so learned that he can define for us the great gulf by which time is surpassed by eternity? What bellowings, therefore, shall they give forth? What sighs shall they heave up from their inmost hearts, when, by careful process of thought, they shall discover that pleasures, lasting for scarcely a moment in time, have passed away like a shadow or a dream, while sorrows shall have no end or term. Intelligence, because it is more eminent, and keen-sighted faculty, shall be tortured with a more intolerable cross. For in this faculty shall be found that worm which sacred Scripture so often threatens upon sinners, when it says, "Their worm shall not die, and their fire shall not be quenched." For as a worm rises from wood, and gnaws constantly at the very wood from which it has risen, so too is the worm born of sin, and with sin it carries on an everlasting war. For this worm is nothing other than perpetual penance, a penance full of raving and desperation, and pain arising from sins, pain which shall fasten its clutches on the souls of the damned, when they realize that because of those sins they have lost the kingdom of heaven, and brought on themselves these indescribable tortures. We read in the book of Genesis that the Egyptians once had 7 years of fertility and abundance, that they ran out of soils in which to pile up their grain. These were followed by 7 other years of such unproductiveness and penury that they were compelled to barter their money, their fields, their cattle, and their very selves for grain. What could describe how mightily they grieved during this latter time over their negligence in conserving grain, at a time when the very mass of it was overflowing their granaries? What could describe their grief at not having provided for the time of future penury, when the due diligence stockpiling grain would not only have freed them from the poverty and hunger, but would also have made them most rich? My dear people, the worm of the damned is such that it knows no rest day or night, but forever chews, gnaws, consumes, and feeds upon the entrails of the wretched. Neither can the wretched ever forget what a splendid opportunity they had here on earth, not only of avoiding these penalties at a meager cost, but of securing the kingdom of heaven at a slender price. As it is, they wrangle with each other forever and say, "Woe unto us! To us the kingdom of heaven was offered, and offered gratis. Nay, we were even pleaded with to accept it, and we refused. If we had repented of our sins and confessed them, all would have been forgiven." Would penance and confession have been so colossal ordeals? If we had implored mercy, it would have most readily been granted us. If we had asked for God's bounty, it would have been there for us. Or if we had offered a cupful of cold water for God's sake, we would have come upon eternal life. But now we shall fast forever. We shall be afflicted forever, and derive no fruit from it. O that golden time, which has now passed away, and shall never return for eternity! What did the world offer us, that we dared to provoke such a terrible God to wrath? Ye, if all the kingdoms and empires of the world had been offered to us, and it had been granted us to enjoy them in peace for many thousands of years, What would this have been compared to the least of these everlasting punishments? This world offered us neither kingdoms nor empires, nor a duration of ages, but the mere shadow of a miserable pleasure, and it is for this that we are now bound to bear the weight of eternal tortures. Oh, why were we so foolish, so blind? Who stole away our minds? Who closed our eyes and blocked up our ears? Who so bewitched us that we never thought of these tortures, that we never gave a thought to this latter time? Who so bewitched us that we never thought of these tortures, that we never gave a thought to this latter time? Who so bewitched us that we never provided against this poverty, that we did not heed those who gave us good warning? If the faculty of intelligence shall suffer all these things, what shall we say of the will, which is the principal cause of sins? The will shall be tortured forever by a rabid envy, which it shall conceive against the glory and honor of all the saints, and against God himself. For as the psalmist says, the wicked shall see and shall be angry. He shall gnash his teeth and pine away. Nor shall the wicked gain that which he desires, for the desire of the wicked shall perish. Hence there shall arise in the very wills of sinners an implacable hatred against God, and from hatred in turn shall be born those horrendous curses and unheard of blasphemies which shall never fail to sound from their lips and mouths. They shall have no further hope of recovering salvation. They shall know of a certainty that never can they return to the grace of God, that never shall their tortures be ended or mitigated. They shall see that it is God who holds them bound, as it were in chains, in these everlasting punishments, that it is He who has hurled upon them the lightning from on high, that it is He who has kindled the furnaces of hell by His almighty breath. Then they shall rage like rabid dogs, and shall never cease from barkings, blasphemies, and contumely. They shall curse God because He has created them, and condemn them to death. They shall curse God because He is now continually killing them, yet never allowing them to die. They shall curse His power because it is torturing them so mightily. They shall curse His wisdom because no foul deed of theirs escapes its notice. They shall curse His kindness, which for them has been turned into ferocity and a verdict. They shall curse His cross and the blood shed upon it, because it has benefited so many. They shall curse the Queen of Heaven, because she has been for many sinners the gate of life and mercy, but to themselves has now become a cruel stepmother. Finally, they shall curse all the saints, because in the midst of their own torments they shall see them rejoicing and shouting in triumph. These curses shall be their everlasting symphony. These curses shall be their matins and vespers. The psalms and hymns which shall be chanted in that mournful temple of demons, where instead of incense there shall be sulphur, instead of candle wax there shall be smoke rising up from pitch and fire. Instead of harps and organs there shall be the screech of chains and the sound of hammers and scourges. Truly, if the mere telling of such horrendous things strikes terror and generates respect, what shall it be actually to dwell in that place of eternity, where these things are spoken and heard? And what ought we to do that we might not be compelled to participate in such mournful solemnities? The prophet Jeremiah recalls that the Lord showed him 2 fruit baskets full of figs. One of these contained figs that were good, and very good indeed. The other contained figs that were bad, and very bad indeed. Figs that could in no way be eaten. Unless I am mistaken, the prophet here shows that these two kinds of figs are a figure of two kinds of people who will exist after this life. For we shall all come to a state which is good and very good indeed, or bad and very bad indeed. There is no middle state between the state of the blessed, which is good and very good indeed, and the state of the damned, which is bad and very bad indeed. For the fire of purgatory, which appears to be a middle state, shall remain in existence up to a certain indefinite time, whereupon all souls who are there now, or will be there in the future, shall be made partakers of everlasting glory and felicity, and shall come upon that state which is good and very good indeed. That the state of the blessed is good and very good indeed, we shall, with God's help, show in our next sermon that the state of the damned is bad and very bad indeed. Will be made clear from what we have already said, and from what we have yet to say. Thus far, we have shown to the best of our ability that the sorrow which arises from the loss of the highest good, and which torments the faculties of the inner soul, is mighty and indescribable. Now we shall show that the sorrow which the punishments and torments of hell shall work upon the external senses of the damned is a most atrocious one. The prize of the blessed is not a certain particular good, separate and distinct from other goods, but is a certain common and general good, containing within itself all goods, all pleasures, and all delights. Boethius defines it thus: a state made perfect by the aggregation of all good things. In like manner, the penalty of the damned is not one specific kind of sorrow affecting the head or kidneys, teeth or eyes, but is a certain general penalty spanning all the sufferings of the body's members, joints, and senses. Here on earth we never experience the general suffering of the damned, just as we never experience the general good of the blessed. For a person with a pain in his eyes does not likewise suffer in his teeth, neither does a person with pain in his teeth suffer also in his eyes. And we may apply the same yardstick to the rest of the body's pain. But in hell, the most ferocious pain shall at one and at the same time be borne in the breast, the kidneys, and in every joint, nerve centre, marrow, sense, and faculty of the body. For as the sinner has used all his members to offend God, so there shall be no part, nay, not the slightest part, of them which shall not have its own proper torturer and executioner. I ask you, if one of us were to be tortured by this general penalty for the duration of a single day, what would he feel? How long would he judge that day to be? Would not single moments to him seem longer than months, and single hours longer than years? Indeed, my people, if we were to see a dog in the street tormented by such general pain, I doubt not that we would be the most mightily moved. If it can in any way be described, this is the penalty, this is the pain by which the damned human beings shall be tortured in hell. And not for the duration of a single day, but for the whole of boundless eternity. But let us here proceed a little more diligent and attentive consideration of all these various kinds of penalties. The eyes, because they look upon all things, deservedly offer themselves first for our consideration. These eyes of ours, here and now, cannot be sated with pleasure. They gaze with such avidity on beautiful forms. Like keepers of curiosities, they swiftly flee to see ludicrous trifling spectacles. Like impure whoremasters, so often lead meretricious images into the bedchamber of the heart. The only thing they cannot bear to look upon is the calamitous woe of the poor and the wretched. What cross do you think will torture the eyes in hell? Of a certainty, the first thing they will see are the horrendous forms of demons. To look upon a demon is so terrible that the experience is said to have cost some people their sanity and others their lives. Saint Bernard, in commenting on the 19th Psalm, tells us of one of his monks who had been visited one night by a certain horrible figure. For the whole of the following day, this monk had almost completely lost his grip on his reason, and never for a moment imagined himself to be safe. Finally, at a time when all the monks happened to be asleep, he gave such a shout that he woke them all up and utterly filled them with terror. Cassian, also, in the Collations, relates that among the ancient authorities, hermits, there existed at times such a tremendous dread of the devil, who was wont to appear to them in different but always horrible forms, that none would dwell alone. Nor would they who shared a cell together dare to sleep all at the same time. While some slept, others kept waking vigils, and never did they refrain from the singing of psalms and hymns. If here in our world devils can claim for themselves such power over us, if we fear them here so mightily, what, I ask you, shall they do in their own territory, where they will neither fear exorcisms, nor holy water, nor the merits and prayers of the saints? If they thus prowl about here, where they are so mightily expelled, what shall they do in the place where they govern and rule? Suppose a man were to walk into a cemetery. If the mere suspicion of their presence should come upon him, it would be enough to make his hair stand on the end, and his voice stick in his throat. What a disturbance shall come upon sinners, when in the common cemetery of the damned they shall meet face to face with so many monsters, phantasms, and chimeras. Also, what a cross shall the eyes of the damned suffer, when they see their wives, parents, and children in the same torments. Hegesippus has left us an account of the destruction of Jerusalem. Alexander, son of Hyrcanus, and captain of the Hebrews, when he wished to inflict the most atrocious penalties on a certain group of people, ordered that 80 prisoners should be crucified in the city square, all at the same time. While they were yet alive, each of their wives and children were to be cruelly slain before their eyes. In this way the wretches would suffer not one, but many deaths. Nor is this the manner of punishment lacking in hell. There, with weighty grief, shall children see their parents, and parents their children, husbands their wives, and wives their husbands, ye, and all who have been the cause of another's sin, bearing them company in the tortures of hell. My dear people, I know at this flourishing university, in Louvain, Belgium, where the sermon was given, a great many young men, truly modest, quiet, studious, and religious young men, are being reared up and instructed. I am aware of this partly by what I have heard from others, and partly by what I have observed myself. I greatly rejoice at this, and give thanks to the common Lord for all of it. But I am also sorely grieved at heart at hearing that among so many upright young men there are those corrupters and corrupted, who move around them, who encircle those who are simple of heart, and by their works entice them to drinking parties, or to dances, or to other incitements of lusts. Woe unto you, foul man, imitator of the devil, pest of youth! Do you thus dare to be envious, and to rob the state of so great a good? What shall you do when you see yourself in the company of those whom you have deceived, in those living combustions of flames? Oh, how often you will say, "Perish the day I first saw you, first sought to address and deceive you. For by hurling you to the vice of drunkenness and to other crimes and scandals, I was hurling myself into these torments." He in turn shall reply to you, "Perish the day that first brought me to you, as a thief and executioner of my soul, the day I first gave ear to your poisonous sermons." This shall be the duet, the symphony of these wretches. But this symphony now admonishes us to make the transitions from eyes to ears. Ears, which heretofore delighted in lewd songs, rejoiced at hearing infamy and detractions against neighbors, listened slothfully for hours on end to hawkers in the public square, yet were wearied by a sermon lasting a mere hour in church. These same ears will hear in hell nothing but groans, bellowings, cryings, contumelies, blasphemies, and curses. For just as in the kingdom of the blessed the divine praises and the sweetest alleluias shall be sung, so in the dungeon of the damned shoutings and blasphemies shall resound forever. These are the hymns which will be sung to the tone of hammers and scourges. I recall reading Pulchard's Life of Sulla. One day that cruel dictator ordered 6,000 men to be assembled in a tight circle. At the same time he gave orders that the Senate should be convened in a temple not far away. He then instructed soldiers that when he made his speech in the Senate, they were to slaughter these 6,000 men as quickly as possible. Thus, when Sulla, the dictator, began his address to the senators, the innumerable chatterings and clashings of striking swords were heard continually, sounds that were mixed with the shouts and groans of those who were being slain. The dictator admonished the senators to listen to the proceedings in the chamber, and not to be curious or pay attention to what was going on outside. Nevertheless, all the senators were frightened and frantic, and could scarcely concentrate on the address. From this we may conjure what a symphony, what organs and harps, we would hear if it were once permitted to us to place our ears at the doorway of hell, were not 6,000, but many more, beyond compare, cry, shout, and bellow forever, are slaughtered, scourged, and struck forever. What shall we say of the sense of smell? No bilge trough can be found so unclean, no sewer with so weighty a stench that it cannot compare with the lake of hell, into which all the filth of the whole world must be thrown. Saint Victor Africanus gives a description of the torments inflicted on the holy martyrs by the Arian Vandals. He confirms that one of the most atrocious of their pains was the stench of the dungeon. The saint so speaks regarding the 4,996 martyrs who were tortured together in the same dungeon. He reports that in the narrow confines of that dungeon, the confessors of Christ were thrown literally one on top of one another, like ranks of locusts, or, as we may properly say, like precious grains of corn. In that congestion, none was allowed a place of retirement to see the needs of nature. Crushed by necessity, they left their dung and urine in the same place, so that the stench and horror surpassed all the variety of their punishments. The Vandals, after their race had been eclipsed by the Moors, were punished mightily by the Moors in their turn. They were publicly led into the same dungeon, and, upon entering, sank up to their knees in a veritable whirlpool of mire. Thus the Vandals themselves saw the fulfillment of the prophecy of Jeremiah's. They that were brought up in scarlet have embraced the dung. My dear people, Compare this punishment of the martyrs with the tongues of the damned. In the dungeon of the confessors of Christ there were but few people. In the dungeon of hell there shall be innumerable people. In the former only the filth of human beings arouse the stench. In the latter all the filth, dung, offal, foulness, and heavy stench of the whole world shall be gathered together. If then the stench of that earthly dungeon surpassed all manner of punishments, who shall be able to bear the incomparable heavier and more terrible stench of hell? Who can read without horror of that novel kind of torment, whether it is true or fictitious, which the Latin poet describes when he says, "Indeed, he joined dead bodies to living ones, linking hand to hand and mouth to mouth. Singular torment, he killed them slowly, and, in grim embrace, they flowed with slime and gore." Virgil, Aeneid. What shall we say to this? That a living and healthy man should be bound to a lifeless cadaver, that a wretched man should waste away from breathing that foul stench, from worms, and from corrupt matter issuing from a corpse, that a living man should be slain by a dead one. Is not the mere hearing of such a thing to be shuddered at, let alone the witnessing of it? But if this manner of punishment seems to us harsh and monstrous, as it truly is, what shall we say of the stench of hell, which shall rise up from so many putrid bodies? But if the sense of smell suffers these things, shall the sense of taste, which is wont to be the cause of weightier and much more numerous crimes, be immune from punishment? My dear people, shall not drunkards and impure gluttons then know, and know truly for the first time, at what cost they have purchased those exquisite dishes and drinks, which here on earth they reckon to have been bought for a paltry price? Truly, that sense of taste will be tortured with incredible hunger and thirst. They who cannot now endure a 2-day fast, and reckon that they have not satisfied nature unless they drink to the point of intoxication and vomiting, shall then be tortured with such hunger and thirst that nothing more grievous can be thought of or contrived. Who would not be moved by the words of the rich man in the Gospel? Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus.
What greater poverty can be thought of? What lesser thing could be sought by that rich man, who at one time feasted sumptuously every day? Luke chapter 16, verse 19. He whom the most exquisite wine could not satisfy does not seek so much as a cup of water, nor, which is more wondrous, does he beseech Lazarus to dip his whole hand in water. He does not ask for so much as a moistened finger. He merely asks that Lazarus dip the utmost tip of his finger in water, and even this is not granted him. These things are told to us that we may know that the sentence of excommunication and interdict passed by the Lord upon the damned is so universal that no one can offer the slightest counsel or help. Whithersoever the damned shall turn their eyes or stretch forth their hands, and they shall know that all access to counsel or help has been closed to them. They who have fallen into the middle of the ocean constantly stretch forth their hands and feet, even as they suffocate and wrestle with death. Still they meet with nothing but water, which eludes all their endeavors and attempts to grasp. Even so shall they who have fallen into the utmost sea of misery suffocate therein forever. They shall ask for help of every kind, yea, for the help of death itself, but in vain. for there is no one who can in any way bring them the slightest help. My dear people, are these things indeed true? Hence have we learned these things. Who told us these things? Did Homer tell them to us? Did Plato? Did Virgil? Truth itself has told us these things, the very wisdom of God who cannot lie. Is there then faith in the world? Have men the use of reason? Can they form a judgment about anything? How is it that such torpor exists in the very people who believe these things? We are so diligent in warding off other and lesser evils. Why is it that we take no forethought as to how we may avoid the tortures of hell? The penalties which we have mentioned thus far are by no means the worst. There are others yet more grievous still. The reckoning of divine justice demands that the sense of touch, through which were committed so many crimes, outrages, sacrileges, debaucheries, and adulteries, shall be tortured much more atrociously than the rest of the senses. The tormentor of this sense shall be fire, a fire so mighty, so living, and so efficacious that our earthly fire compared to it seems not true, but painted fire. We cannot doubt that this fire will cause the mightiest affliction and torture because it has been specifically created by God to be the instrument of His justice. My dear people, suppose that a man living were cast into a glowing furnace, and that the door were closed while he remained there for a solid hour. If we were to contemplate attentively the pain which would be his, we would not gain a clear understanding, but a mere scent, as it were, of what it is like to live in hell. I ask you, what shoulders should be able to bear those living flames? What breast should be shattered by that eternity of tortures? As the prophet Isaiah says, which of you shall dwell with everlasting burnings? Isaiah chapter 33, verse 14. Need we say more? With this punishment another, and by no means a lesser, one will be joined, for the damned shall be tortured not only by the heat of fire, but by unbearable cold as well. If we rely upon the words of St. Basil the Great, scarcely any torture can be compared to that produced by the harshness of the bitterness cold. That saint has left us an account of 40 martyrs. A certain most cruel and ferocious tyrant wished to torture these martyrs with an indescribable torment. He bore in mind that it was the dead of winter, and that they abode in a country which was bitterly cold by nature. Such was the cold which prevailed there, that people could drive their wagons and packed animals over a certain ice-bound lake. The mightiest rivers ceased to flow in their courses, and became not so much rivers as roads paved with marble. He picked a night when the north winds were howling at their fiercest, and on this night ordered the martyrs to be exposed naked under the sky, and allowed to perish from lingering and indescribable torments. This, my dear people, shall be the sport of the damned. This shall be their sporting match, that, as Job says, they shall be bound over from excess of heat to showers of snow, and from showers of snow to excessive heat. Nor are these figments or fables of poets. Hear what the Lord says to Job. Hast thou entered into the storehouses of the snow? Or hast thou beheld the treasures of the hail, which I have prepared for the time of the enemy, against the day of battle and war? Job 38, verses 22 through 23. Hear the psalmist. Fire and brimstone and storms of winds shall be the portion of their cup. Psalms 10, verse 7. And if this portion is so bitter, what shall it be to drink the whole of the chalice? O unhappy people, how much better it would have been for you if you have never been born. O miserable eyes, which shall be terrified by the horrendous forms of demons, which will be tortured by the densest smoke, which will always be open to behold your miseries. O miserable ears, which will hear forever the sounds of scourges and blasphemies, and the groaning of the wretched. O wretched nostrils, which shall smell forever the stench of a most filthy place, and of stinking bodies. O wretched bellies and mouths, which shall be tormented by everlasting starvation and hunger, and intolerable thirst. O wretched members, which shall inhabit that which vomits up sulphurous flames. Shall it be for 10 years, or 20, or 100, or 1,000? Not so, for this would be some sort of consolation. Truly it shall be for eternity and beyond, if a beyond could be found. Eternity, O brief word, which signifies for us so lasting a reality. My dear people, this eternity is of such a nature that without it no punishment can be adjudged to be heavy. Neither with it can we reckon any punishment to be light. Nevertheless, this salt shall the punishments of the damned be flavored. For the damned shall be tortured for as many ages as there are stars shining in the heaven, as there are grains of sand on the seashore, yea, as there are drops of water in the ocean. And when these gulfs of ages have gone by, their sorrows shall begin all over again. This great wheel shall be turned without end. The psalmist says, they are laid up in hell like sheep, death shall feed upon them. Psalms chapter 48, verse 15. Sheep graze upon the surface leaves of plants, yet do not pluck the roots, so that the plants may grow again and be fed upon in their turn. Thus shall it be in the pastures of hell, where are to be found the flocks of the damned, the pasture of torments, and death, the pastor of the herd. The damned shall be led by death to pasture, and shall graze upon torments forever. Nor shall the fodder ever be exhausted, or that chalice of the Lord, which they shall drink, ever be drained dry. The dungeon of hell shall remain for as long as the kingdom of heaven exists. The damned shall be tortured for as long as the blessed shall rejoice. And finally, reprobate shall die in hell for as long as God himself shall live. And unless God ceases to be what he is, they shall not cease to be what they are. O death-dealing life, O immortal death, what name shall we finally give thee, life or death? If thou art life, why doest thou kill? If death, why doest thou endure? We may call thee neither life nor death, for each of these states has some good in it. Life has quiet in death, and has an end. But thou hast neither quiet nor an end. What shall we say that thou art, if not the totality of evil contained in life and death? From death thou hast drawn torture, and from life duration. Truly God despoiled life and death of that good which was in them, and what was left he placed in thee. O poison concoction, O bitter drug, from this chalice of the Lord all sinners shall drink. My dear people, it would assuredly be An excellent thing if we could comprehend but a little the eternity of punishment. For this thought alone, like a bridle, restrain all our lusts and moderate our lives, so that we would all seem to be not only Christians, but most holy monks and anchorites. Think of the cross suffered for the span of a single night, by a man afflicted by some grave ailment. How often does he turn from this side to that side? How long does the night seem to him? How he counts the hours, and what a length of time he judges each of them to be. What a longing grips him for the dawn and the light. How often does he inquire how much of the night has passed and whether the rays of light are starting to appear? If such a sorrow seems so huge to us, what will be the sorrow of those who lie not upon a soft bed, but in living and blazing flames for the whole span of that night, which has no dawn, and awaits not the light of day? O deepest darkness, O night, eternal night, O night that shall not see the light of day and the splendor of dawn. My good people, if the mere thought of this eternity terrifies us, what shall it be not only to contemplate, but actually to dwell amid eternal punishments? To be tortured without end is a horrendous thing. That if it fell to the lot of but one of the children of Adam to be struck with such a punishment, we would all have reason to fear and tremble.